When the sun set on Britannia, the loss of Great Britain's empire here in Southeast Asia during World War II. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gregory Foster here, and I'm going to be doing a presentation on my paper here on the loss of Great Britain's empire here during World War II here in Southeast Asia. And it's a paper from my British history class test during 2016 at Bowie State University. So behind me is a picture of Great Britain's empire here, and the phrase up top says the sun never sets on the British Empire. Here, over everything in red, it shows all of the British territories from Canada all the way through Africa to India and the rest of Asia, all the way to Australia. Yeah. Because of this phrase, the British had a lot of arrogance and also a lot of pride in their hold on their empire. The next slide that I will show is a short video clip that will actually show when the sun actually did set on the British Empire. So this Japanese video clip shows when the Japanese conquered Singapore in February 1942. It actually shows when the sun set on the British flag in their Southeast Asian empire. This slide presentation shows my outline of the presentation, beginning with background on British and Japanese relations and concluding with the empires and with the independence of India. To begin, Britain's weakening of its empire began long before World War II. It actually had started around in World War I, when the British became close allies with the Japanese. Around this time, they were primarily focused on dealing with Germany as a threat, since Germany was growing as an industrial power and was the main adversary during World War I. After the First World War, the treaty between England and Japan had ceased in 1923. As a result of the Japanese expanding in their political interest and becoming a political power in a sphere of influence. as a result, they began to see the British Empire as well as the United States as a potential enemy. By the 1930s, Britain had become unprepared to deal with Japan as a threat in Southeast Asia. Despite many possessions across the globe, though Britain was weak within its empire. During the 1930s, the British chose to use appeasement in order to avoid confrontations. Such was the case with British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and his appeasement deals with Adolf Hitler. This slide behind me is a power index shown from a statistic in 1938. And as you can see, Britain is ranked, as number 4, or right behind Germany. And it shows how Britain was ranked, as a weak state at this point. Primarily in the areas of the size of the military and also in military spending. After World War I, Britain's empire was also starting to decrease as many of its colonies were starting to seek and desire independence, beginning with Ireland in 1922, and then around in the 1930s, the colony of India that began its own movement and pressuring the British government and to allow them to gain independence. In 1935, the Indian Government Act that was established as the British government sought to appease these Indian leaders with the opportunity to have them rule on their own without British oversight. Unfortunately, this was only partially met, as many in the British government had still held control over India. From late 1941 through early 1942, the Japanese began their simultaneous and systematic attack in conquering Southeast Asia, taking Britain's territories and colonies. The first phase of the attacks began with Japanese spies infiltrating the colonies and also collaborating with the colonials to gather information. One British officer had estimated that 35% of the Japanese success and victory was due to the collaboration and in cooperation of the various colonials. The second phase was a simultaneous attack from land, sea, and air by Japanese forces, which also proved evidence of the British weakening of the defenses, as one British officer and an official, Sir Robert Bruce Hamilton, described that the British defenses was like a bag of golf clubs in comparison to the Japanese offensive. So behind me, you see a flag of the Japanese Imperial Army, not the British flag, which displays how successful the Japanese were in taking control of Southeast Asia. And behind me here is also a map of what the Japanese imperial empire, imperial sphere of influence looked like. Beginning with Hong Kong, over on the coast of China, and then down into Burma and Malaysia, with Singapore at the end of the peninsula. Very important thing to understand is that India, although it was invaded, it was never actually taken by the Japanese. And Australia, there were incursions that occurred in the country by Japanese forces, but it was also never taken. Also, about this time, and the Japanese took tens of thousands of prisoners from the British Army. Although most of these soldiers that they had captured were not even British, because there were a mixture of the various soldiers who fought in the British Empire, from Indians to Australians and New Zealanders. But the quickness of these soldiers being captured, it was a major sign of how the British Empire was very weak at this point. Around this time period, as the slide shows, was the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, that was delivering a speech at the U.S. Congress in December of 1941. But with the capture of Hong Kong by the Japanese, this became a major embarrassment for the British Empire and for Churchill. However, he encouraged the United States to become involved in the Second World War, and he also made it a point that their focus in the war was against Germany, as they viewed Hitler and the Nazi Party as the more major and dominant threat. The most important thing also to know is that the British Empire was not willing and was not prepared to fight a two-theater war. They had most of their resources and military. They focused in Europe, while the rest of their forces, which were very minimum in comparison to their focus, is they were not prepared to face the Japanese. Around this time also, though, there was the Quit India movement that took place in 1942. The primary leaders were Mahatma K. Gandhi of the Indian Congress, and also Muhammad Ali Jinnah of the Muslim League. Although both leaders had two different views about what they wanted to accomplish from the movement, they had a similar goal in mind of freeing India from British rule. And around this time, there was fear and suspicion by the British government on whether India would align with the Japanese as Japanese forces began to invade India. Also at this time, tens of thousands of soldiers were being held in Japanese imprisonment camps, and many POWs were forced to work on various projects by the Japanese military. Often, then they were bridges and railroads, and this picture here is actually a construction site on the river Kwai. The major thing that the British felt at this point was the reversal role that they were now playing during this time period. That prior to World War II, they were viewed as the main masters, as the conquerors, who had their own slaves and imperial rule at the time. But with the downfall of their East Asian empire and the conquest of the Japanese these forces, they were forced to become slaves to the Japanese, these imperial forces. And as you know, slaves do not rule empires. However, in 1944, the British had a comeback as they began by retaking in Burma and also receiving support from their allies, particularly the United States. However, as you see in the propaganda poster, with United we are strong, and United we will win, and Britain no longer had the superior power to massively use its military. They relied mostly on the United States, which, as you can see here, they had the larger cannon, and which displayed how the United States would rise as the major superpower. In addition, also, though the United States also had another major use of their power, which is through the nuclear bomb that they used, is on the Japanese countryside, particularly Hiroshima and Nagasaki. As a result of the British allowed their victories to be obtained through the American military and economic might. However, in order for Britain to move on and with their own interest as in remaining an ally to the United States, American military and political leaders forced the British Empire to consider and also strongly move to ending its imperial state. Thus the process of imperial de-evolution and devolution, actually, they would continue with the end of the colonies of Great Britain. One of the first colonies, of course, that ended, it was in 1947, then with India's independence from the British Empire. As a result of this, the British began to watch as the flag across their colonies, these would fall, and their own and other independence movements and liberation and struggles began to arise, from Africa all the way to 1965. So, in conclusion, in my presentation, in which hopefully I presented it very well, it would focus on the devolution of British imperialism in Southeast Asia and the downfall of Britain's Southeast Asian empire. Thank you.